Thank you all for coming. I want to thank Thomas and the group for putting this together. I was grateful to be included, and I really came because I wanted to hear what all these other people were doing with it. So I found it a little more difficult for me to understand what's the point of these images that you see thousands of images every day on Instagram, and most of them didn't make a lot of sense to me or seemed to be uneducated. And I have a very classic education with very large cameras. So this is how I began, and it's all black and white. And the camera here on the left is 40 by 60 inch negative. So everything I do is a contact print. The bellows went out 18 feet. Rodenstock made the lens for me. I was working on a castle project in Alsace and Palatinate with the 14-17 inch camera, which I built in a week so that I could shoot vertical, horizontal of the castles. And this is my education, how I started. So I started with a half-frame camera, motorized, then 35 millimeter, then 2 1/4, then a 4x5 in college, to 8x10 when I was living in Carmel. And then they just kept getting bigger, the cameras. So that's what I was working with. It's a huge departure from what I'm seeing today and what I'm even doing today. So now you have to load film holders, and then you have 100 kilos of equipment that you're carrying around, and lenses and tripods and dark cloths and filters, and you're climbing up all these environments. So it's a very methodical way of working. I mean, it doesn't change much. But when you set up a big camera like this, you make a commitment to the image. And I think that's where I've always come from, is that I could walk around a scene, but then when I set the camera up, I'm making a commitment to that image. So I don't take more than one, usually. And it also, like the picture on the bottom was a 30-minute exposure. So you can have people walk through the image, and you can have them ghost, or you can have them not be there at all. And then you have to pack it all back up and put it back in the truck. And then you have to make the print. So I used 1800s formulas for chemistry, so you have to mix all the chemistry from scratch, and then you process the negative, and I did inspection development, so I knew when the negative was cooked enough. And then you wash it and mix chemistry, and then proceed to printing. And you end up, at least I became very methodical, and I only used one film and one developer, pyrogallic acid, and one paper, which was azo, which isn't made anymore, and then amidol as a developer. So I went into staining developers and stuff. So there was no grain because you were removing all the silver from the negative and replacing it with stain. And then you'd have to, trim it and mount it and catalog it and label it. And so it's a totally different way of working than the smartphone. And to give you, then I started playing with the digital camera. So here you can seeing the digital camera shoots in color, but I envision everything in black and white. So when I look in the rangefinder, I'm seeing a black and white image. I'm not seeing it. Like with the view camera, everything you saw was upside down and backwards. So I was just used to seeing the world go by upside down and backwards. And so I could take this file and create what I saw in my head, which is a black and white image, fully tonality. And I still haven't really gotten out the mindset of making a classical black and white print. So whether I'm using a big camera or a small camera or a digital camera, it always brings me back to my roots, which is a fine art black and white print. So here you can see where you've converted it, and then I have to print it. So we're printing it on archival paper, so it's still for longevity. It's not made, at least what I do, to be transient or to be like Instagram documentation. The images you saw in the show, this was a portfolio that I put together with some poetry by Florence Weinberger, and you can see how walking down the beach, I could shoot kelp and then filter it and change it, and then now it becomes, again, a black and white image, but it becomes more sculptural, more, like it's almost calligraphy in a certain way. So, but I saw, when I go to take it, I see the black and white. I wasn't seeing the color. So even though you'd see these things in color, it becomes something else, and it was a feeling that I wanted to portray, or it was almost, like I said, calligraphy. This was a project that I did with the iPhone 4. Some of it, I would sit, we were building our house, we lived on the beach for a while we were building, and I would just take this camera and just go click. And that then turned into, I started doing the grids, which you see on the far side. So I started putting the images together. And actually, Thomas had seen this work in Malibu and said, that's process. The single images were the final product. So I started off doing all these grids, and there's probably 20 of them. And then I went into the single images, and then I ended up making them 6 feet by 6 feet, or 2 meters by 2 meters roughly. And it became a totally different thing. So I was known for detail. You could read everything in my photographs. And then all of a sudden, I went to this very small file that I blew up very large and blurred, and they almost became kind of Rothko-y to me. It was about color, which I never photographed. So it was interesting. Now I started this whole series that then took my vision to a different level and got me into color, which I never was into. So these are 2 images that were quite large, but you can see how they started out on the top, because I was shooting them towards twilight, and then I could correct them the way I wanted, and then make them the color I wanted. So, but they're very soft. When you get up close to them, they're just almost like just colors fading and moving. And that's kind of what I was looking for. Then when I started playing with the iPhone, the image on the left is when during the Malibu fires, we were evacuated and walking in Santa Monica with the dogs. Then I saw this, and then that was the Instagram image that appeared. And then I actually made a print of it. So, and the same thing on the right, that was some woman that was at the Getty Museum. And it was just, the color just struck me in the composition. So there's the original on the right, and then the Instagram one on the left. And then I'm still playing with, here's the camera phone picture, there's the Instagram picture, there's a black and white if I chose to do black and white. But is what I'm developing now, and I'm not showing, I'm sorry for that, is I was walking around taking what I call pictures of nothing. So a friend of mine in Chicago said, why don't you do a book on much to do about nothing? So we started editing these pictures, but I didn't shoot the pictures that I'm going to have in that book to make them important, because they weren't important. They were just, I'm walking down, there's a broom on the ground, take a picture of it. So it's kind of my response to what I'm seeing on Instagram, is most of it are pictures of nothing, or that have no meaning to me. So I thought, well, that's kind of fun. So I can walk around and shoot a little tree as I'm walking the dogs, or shoot, like I said, a broom, or any other little item. But I did notice when we started to edit these then, that it is my sensibility. So you still bring your own sensibility to it. So the compositions, are the same whether I was using a big camera or just going click. So you still, that training over 50 years of how you see the world, positive, negative space, tonality, still comes through. And I'm not converting these. So I wouldn't do something like this. They're all exactly how they were shot. They're all in color. If I had to spend more than 30 seconds on it, I wasn't interested. So that series will be coming out in a book in about 4 months. And so it's an interesting change for me, but it's also very interesting to hear how all these other artists and scientists are working and using the iPhone. And that's really my talk. So if you have any questions.
you're saying it is not the vision. No, sorry, it is the tool. No.
Yeah.
It is the tool, it's not...
It's not the tool, it's the vision. Yeah.
Sorry for that. Your artistic approach remains the same, aside from which technique you're working with. So, what do you think? Do you found another visual language by using the iPhone? I mean, you talked about the little things beside, and regarding your work, you're actually showing in Sapphire these very poetic, beautiful little things you found on the beaches. Would it be possible with a large format camera?
Yeah, the large format would be easy to do, but a lot more work. Yeah. And I usually work in projects. So if it's a city project, I can go photograph Denver, I can go photograph Chicago, or I can go photograph Atlanta, or I can do Four Corners area and do a project. So there was always a start and a finish, and then all the thinking that goes in between to try and pull it together, and then editing, and then sequencing, and I like working in books because it seems to culminate my thoughts and put out there exactly what I was thinking. So the iPhone then became not like that. So you're doing snapshots of everything with no end product in mind. So when it was brought to me to do this Much Ado About Nothing book, it's like, well, I never thought about it. They're just, here's all these images. So when I sent it to the book designer and he started editing it, and I'm looking and going, wow, I never looked at it like that. Because I never put the time into looking at it like that. So to go from doing projects and having to think through what you're doing, look at your compositions, and on a big camera, you get under the cloth and you're looking upside down and backwards, like I said, but you're looking at every square inch. So if the negative's this big, and you're under this cloth and you step back, you're still looking at the positive negative space, and I was seeing it in black and white, and I knew when I clicked the shutter what the print would look like. So before I even went in the darkroom, if you use the same materials over and over, you just get very used to those materials and how they're going to react to light and so forth. So that was very kind of my process. So this is kind of fun working with the iPhone because there is no process. It's just having fun with it.
Brings us back to serendipity.
Yes,
and the possibilities with it. Questions from the audience?
More of a observation, not on your talk, but on the talks in general. I find it quite fascinating that at least 3 or 4 of the speakers so far have mentioned not only the iPhone, but the iPhone model in their talks. So you know, this was with the 3 and this was with the 4, same before. I find this quite fascinating because we are talking about smartphone photography, and then it's still these sub-chapters within the smartphone photography and the limitations of technology. And now, from your talk earlier, I found it quite fascinating when you say, okay, I'm now, you couldn't do the pictures in the exhibition anymore because that was part of the limitations of the technology that is not there anymore. And so I'm very curious about the glitches in the future when the technology becomes more and more perfect, and nighttime photography with the newest generation smartphones I did a lot of nighttime photography 10 years ago, and it was 30 minutes of exposure.
Yeah.
Nowadays, the same can be done with one exposure that's just like a snapshot, which I find quite fascinating. So that this developing field, it was. What do you think about it? Now it's a question.
Yeah. I never thought about which iPhone it was until I got asked to be in this symposium. So when I started looking up everyone that was in the symposium, so I didn't look like a total idiot, to see what they were doing and what was important, then I could go back and see what product it was. And the only reason I mentioned the iPhone 4 is because it was so low res, and then when I was upsizing these to 6 feet by 6 feet, it becomes a different animal. So now the cameras they're working on have 9 lenses. They're going from very close to infinity. You can now pick what you want, put them together. So in the old days, it was all physics, right? You'd sit there, you have a focal length on a lens, you're under the cloth, and you focus a third of the way through, you either tilt, swing, do whatever you're going to do, and then stop down the lens, the f-stop, until everything came into focus. So the work I was doing in black and white, everything was in focus. There was nothing soft focus. It was all about detail to me and tonality. Then so I think, it's going to evolve. The technology is going to evolve where we don't need to know about physics. We don't need to know about chemistry. We don't need, it makes the tool very easy to use. And I still believe, because we were talking last night, that the artist is still the artist. Yes, lots of people can take photos with the iPhone or whatever you're using. But there's a certain sensibility in how you see the world, how you work in the world, and then what you put out into the world. So I've always felt that, you edit, and put out a cohesive little walk through that project. Now it's like you just take a picture and where it fits, and you put it up on Instagram, and you forget about it. I was kind of shocked when I saw how many pictures I actually had on Instagram. So I had used it to try and sell work. I had used it to sell product. I never found it ever worked for that. So I just went into having fun with it. And frankly, I do more photographs of my dogs and my granddaughters than I do of what you're seeing up here.
Many of you didn't talk about the scale, because if you upload it on Instagram, it's squared.
Mm-hmm.
So and you not necessarily. Okay.
Square is
But-
default, but you can
Yeah,
switch.
but most of them. It's
You can
and
use that as a default.
yeah, and this is a decision you let take Instagram for you somehow. When you decided to make the series of your color pictures, and they are 6 by 6 inches, is it because of this maybe, or are
No.
you interested in scale at all?
I'm very interested in scale,
Yeah.
and I like the square. The portfolio you saw that's up at Zephyr is square because I'm doing horizontal vertical images, and it just works better than a rectangle, and you're trying to do a vertical and a horizontal, or a horizontal and a vertical. So I like the square. I have no problem with the square. I picked the square format for the other series for this. So the entire series is square. There's no rectangles at all. And that series was done in 2002, and now you see a lot of images like this. But when we did it, it was very, you didn't see it, because it was all the things that I just said. It was a low pixel camera. It became something else. It became much more about color and emotion, and not about detail and things. And what was your second question part you just asked?
No, it was just an observation that there are so many square images here, and of course, if you use Instagram as a tool, you somehow give away your decision what kind of scale you choose. Or, it's not always the case, but most of it. And maybe if people don't use Instagram very frequently, or maybe also if they do, maybe they also think of making these pictures or taking these pictures in a square sense.
Yeah, well, scale has also become a thing for me. So if I wanted a certain size, a 20 by 24 inch print, I built a 2024 camera. And then it was a contact print. So then again, it was about detail, right? But now, I tell the story about meeting Sarkowski, and we were talking, and he said he liked the old days when he could go to visit an artist with the New York Times, take a print from him, stick it in a folded New York Times, and take the subway back to the museum. And I just got to the point where I just got sick of all these giant images, and where do you store them? So I have a storage unit, and then, so now I don't do anything over 6 by 9, any print. So the iPhone works really well for that, because you can do them really small, right? But even then, like when I started getting into this, you could see here's where it started, that's where it ended. But that literally took 15 seconds. If I have to spend more time than that, I'm just not interested in doing any manipulation, really. So, and the same thing with the other one. You know, if one on the right was the original, boom, just adjust contrast, adjust saturation, and you're done. And then post it on Instagram, right? And that's how I'm working now. So I'm not, no black and white. You know, I'm just doing these quick, and one a day.
Any more questions?
Not a question really, but maybe a comment to elaborate a bit on one aspect of what you were busy with. I think this is something we can watch over the entire history of photography, that in the beginning it was a rather specialized activity that needed a lot of knowledge and craft by the person who executed it, and you needed a very simple equipment. And in the process of developing the technology, more and more of the knowledge was built into the tool, and basically nowadays every idiot can by accident take a good photograph because all the craft is built in and you don't need any knowledge and any craft at all to make a good picture. So that is a quite challenging situation for the photographer because it really depends on your imagination, your vision, what you call vision, intellectual capacity, whatever, but it has nothing to do with craft anymore.
Yeah, well, I feel that's not necessarily true. The craft, it's still the vision, right? So it's not the tool, in my estimation. You know, someone that's working in it daily, you know, that's the artist here, you have to still hit consistently images. If you do a one-off, that doesn't make you an artist. It's the vision and how you're going to, you know, walk through the world showing your vision. So I think, yes, you can give, I don't know how many of you know Ted Orland. He used to be Ansel's assistant. And we have a rendezvous every year where all these photographers come from all over the country. And we show work and drink and have a good time for a weekend. And Ted brought a portfolio, and he's showing this portfolio. And the images are really interesting. But I thought, what's he on his knees through this whole portfolio? And when he got done, there was a camera that he hung around his cat's neck, and it would take an image every 30 seconds. And then he edited them all through to his sensibility, and then mounted them and overmatted them and put them in a portfolio case. So you thought he had done these pictures. But it was random, right? It was serendipity. It was, but he still had to edit it to use the ones that worked and that compositionally worked and tonally worked. And so it threw everybody off a lot because it was a cat that did this portfolio, not a human being.
I think Joachim's basic observation is correct, that the change of the tool enables a lot of people creating images which fulfill the expectations we had like 5 years ago into contemporary photography or something like that. So the good thing is that photography develops. So the artists who are doing now work, even with their smartphones, probably do something different. It might be more conceptual, it might be use different aesthetics, whatever. So the question is, when will the development of the technical tool hit the moment of contemporary fashion? And that will be very interesting, I guess.
Yeah, they're working on that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I mean, we were talking about this earlier at the table. Maybe this is what would be the test of time that we face now, because I come to realize that there are quite a few artists who had been photographers who had been quite popular maybe 10 years ago, who worked for years and years to develop a certain artistic style in their photography, and that has now become an Instagram filter. That must be so devastating. But then we have to go back and think, well, was it that interesting then in the first place if it can now be easily be replaced by an Instagram filter, maybe it wasn't. Maybe we have to go as artists a step further and question our own roles and question the tool itself. So is our art somehow linked to the tool? Because if everyone can use the same tool, do we lose? Do we benefit from the tool? Or is our role more the one of the curator who goes, well, now I say it because if you see my presentation, I'm all about curating other people's images. Let's call it theft. But so it's quite interesting. I think it must be so devastating as an artist when you're very proud. But then earlier at the table I mentioned, well, yeah, maybe whenever these artists show their work in the past, people were approaching them. Oh, how did you do that? Oh, wow, that's so interesting. And all the conversation was about the technique they used and how they did it, and not so much what the image was about. And that's why they can be easily replaced by an Instagram filter.
Yes and no. I mean, when I was teaching up at Victor School in Colorado for Al Weber, and they had all kinds of workshops there, from painting to photography, and I had put up like 4 images tacked on the wall. They were 8 by 20-inch contact prints. And like you said, the photographers go, oh, what size camera do you use, and what's the developer, and the paper, and the painters walked up that were there and said, that's a contact print. They knew more and were willing to accept it for what it was than the photographers, like you said. They want to know that. Me, as a traditional photographer, I don't feel, after 50 years of working, that I wasted my time the way I worked. I think that I couldn't take the image I'm taking today if I didn't take the image I took yesterday. So I think it's just an evolution on the vision, but I have to say it's a shitload easier doing these than the big cameras. So I think it freed my vision more, and I'm happy to do that. And I think, you know, you're not growing, you're not part of the society if you're not willing to open yourself up to change and seeing where your vision is going to take you without judging it.
Danke. Well, I think, you know, what Simon said can be put into one sentence is, can we be replaced by an algorithm, yes or no? And that's the proof.
Being an artist doesn't mean having the technical knowledge. Maybe it's more about the vision, or even being a step further about contextualization, about posing questions. I mean, I don't want to talk about what makes an artist, but that is the fact. So in the general.
Well, that's
context.
a very big debate right now. You know, is AI real? You know, they just sold a print for some ridiculous $68,000 that the AI did. Well, you know, I think it's all mental masturbation at that point. I still think if you look at an artist's body of work, you see where they started, where they ended up, and everything in between, and how they developed that vision. Well, you can have a computer, sure, AI, come up with some piece of art. I haven't seen one that is that soul-filled, you know, that I think that it's color, and it's, you know, like the algorithms will make the shapes and do the thing, but it's not what's in somebody's soul, and it's not what they're putting out in the world that means something. You know, what comes out of your heart is different than an algorithm and a computer, I think. Oh. Time to stop.
Maybe that's the final.
What timing?